Oh, it's been a hell of a week. So, got a very special treat for you guys. I finally finished reading this bad boy right here. Nice little cover art here. Glossy. This is Volume 1 of Sword Art Online Progressive. So, I'm not really familiar with this franchise at all. It's been around for a while, and I've heard people talk about it, of course, but it's never really interested me much. And I'm not sure why. I just decided to pick it up off the store shelves. I guess I just like the cover art and wanted something different. From what I could tell, just in like the author's notes in here, it's apparently a retelling of the original. I guess there's an original light novel series, just like a original Sword Art Online, and this one is a more in-depth retelling. So I guess it expands upon the original story and introduces new ideas and whatnot. I didn't know what the story of Sword Art Online was before I got into this, and I didn't really want to do any research into it. I didn't want to go in with any preconceived notions or opinions. I just wanted to go in dry with no lube. I just bought the book and started reading. What I do know about the franchise is that it's a popular whipping boy for anime YouTubers and bloggers and whatnot, particularly the anime adaptation of the original light novel series, which I also know nothing about. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that some anime YouTubers have actually built their careers off of uh, slagging off this series, and even to this day, I still see videos popping up talking about like all the problems with the Sword Art Online anime, or negative reviews. Going into this with only that in mind, I wasn't exactly sure what to expect. I don't usually take internet critics at face value. I don't usually take it to heart when I'm going into a new series or like a movie or anything like that. If I listen to most critics, like music critics, Anthony Fantano and whatnot, if I just listened to all their recommendations and skipped all the things they've given bad scores to, I would have missed out on a lot of cool stuff over the years. I tried to push that away, keep it out of my mind, and go into this with an open mind and try to just judge it on its own merits. And honestly, I really liked it. It's not the most mind-blowing piece of literature out there, but as someone who isn't, fantasy isn't my primary genre of choice. I don't think I actually really have a genre of choice, but I mean, I don't usually go for fantasy books these days when I'm buying stuff. And I guess this technically isn't a fantasy. I actually wasn't sure what direction it would go in when I started reading it, because it is technically a sci-fi book because it takes place in like a virtual reality game, but the game is fantasy themed. So I wasn't sure which side it would go more heavily on, if it would read more like a fantasy, or if the sci-fi elements would play a bigger part. And in the first few chapters, it becomes very apparent that it's definitely a sci-fi book. The plot and all the mechanics of the story hinge heavily on the fact that it is in this RPG world. That question kind of got answered pretty quickly, and I was pretty happy with that. Fantasy books are a dime a dozen these days. All the typical fantasy tropes. So I did want something that was a bit different. Now, that being said, I do think the basic premise for this series is not only is it a bit basic and bare bones, but it also hold on a sec. Hey, shut up. Sorry about that. Well, I do think the basic premise for this story is a bit bare bones. And actually, not only just bare bones, but it's kind of stupid. So, all right, I should go over the basic premise. The person who wrote this book, I guess, Reiki Kawahara, they thought, I want to make a series about where it's in a virtual reality game, and if you die in the game, you die in real life. So that's the entire premise of the game, or of the series. It's in a game, and if you die in the game, you die in real life. But if you can get past how kind of silly and simplistic that premises and actually, get immersed into the story and characters, this book is actually really enjoyable, and it does make use of the various themes very quite well, using the whole idea of dying in this game is an actual death. That whole aspect of it does actually lend a lot of tension to the action scenes. I guess I should do like a bit of a recap on the story. I don't want to get into spoilers because I do like this book, and I would say right now I do recommend, if you're interested in a sci-fi or fantasy story, I do definitely recommend this. So the basic story is there's this character named Kirito, and he's one of these people who bought this RPG, Sword Art Online, that uses a virtual reality headset that connects to your brain, and the story is really dumb, just bear with me. The game is built around sword fighting monsters, and it uses various RPG mechanics, like you level up your character and you level up your swords, so you can have like a sword of +1 speed, +2 durability, things like that. I don't want to invoke like the video game version of Godwin's Law or whatever it's called, where like Godwin's, I think it's called Godwin's Law, where it's everything ends up being compared to World War II and Nazis and whatnot. The video game equivalent of that is everything is compared to Dark Souls. But there is a lot of similarity between Sword Art Online and the mechanics of, say, Dark Souls. So in Sword Art Online, there's no real classes or anything like that, and the stats for your weapon are just as important as the stats for your character. There's like dodge mechanics, like characters can leap out of the way of attacks and dodge them, and get critical hits and whatnot. And there's like stun mechanics and things like that. So if you visualize in your mind, how like combat works in like Dark Souls almost, or like maybe even Bloodborne, you can kind of get a general idea of how the combat system in this virtual reality MMORPG works. The main character goes into this game, and he was a beta tester at first, so he learned a lot of the mechanics, he's more experienced. And then on the day of the official release for the game, everyone gets trapped into it, so they can't, they go into the game world using these virtual reality headsets, and then they can't leave. So basically their bodies are trapped in like a comatose state. They're like vegetables, and presumably they were transported. I was wondering if the book would cover this, and it does. It doesn't at first, but like kind of gives you more information as it goes along. Presumably their bodies are in hospitals, just kind of comatose, and with the virtual reality headsets on them, and they're probably being like drip fed nutrients and being sponge bathed by nurses. So that's what's happening in the real world. But in the virtual world, they're in this fantasy land, and there's this big tower called what the is it called? Aincrad or whatever. Yeah, Aincrad. Okay, I was right. So there's this big tower, and it has, I think, 100 levels, and they have to scale all of them, and there's a boss for each floor that needs to be defeated. The implication is that once they scale all of the floors of the tower, the game will be over, it will be defeated, and they will be able to log out of the game and go back to their daily lives, albeit much more atrophied and withered than before. I think the book could have expanded more on this side of the story. It does lend a very kind of like tragic kind of air to the story, that the fact that in real life they're basically in a coma, like all these thousands of people, and they're away from their families in this virtual world instead. It does play into the character developments somewhat, but I think if there's one problem that I had with the book, is that it doesn't really go into the psychology of it as much. Like it is mentioned, but as I don't think it's given as much weight as I would have wanted. Instead, the story focuses a lot more on what's happening in the game. And so this character Kirito, he's kind of a loner, and he borders on self-insert. So a lot of light novels have a character who's kind of sort of similar to the writer, or someone just a lot of otaku can relate to, but usually they're really nerdy. And a lot of the times they'll have like a certain skill set that will help them in like whatever fantasy world they go to if it's an isekai. And this isn't too far off from that. So Kirito is a loner. He's a video game junkie. Not a lot else going on for him. His skill set helps him kind of navigate this virtual world that he's in, and lets him help other people and basically become a hero. So, like I said, it really borders on self-insert, but as the book goes along, you see his personality kind of develop more as someone, he's a teenager, so of course he has a lot of anxiety around women, particularly when he first meets Asuna, the heroine here. Like there's like a little bit right at the beginning of the book when he meets him, where he gets real self-conscious about like mansplaining to her and things like that, and he kind of catches himself before saying things that he knows might hurt her feelings. So let me wet my whistle real quick. And yes, this is cold brew coffee. It's been a long week. I'm tired. So he does kind of have his own personality, and he's not. He is a nice guy. He's like a good guy, Greg type character, but he does have some selfish tendencies. This is a minor spoiler, but it's not going to spoil too much. One character mentions that Kirito had gotten himself sort of a reputation during the beta of being like a kill stealer, where if someone else is fighting a monster, he'll like swoop in and hit it, one more time, defeat it, get that killing strike in, and that when you do that in Sword Art Online, you get the loot for the monster. He wants all the loot to himself, and that does kind of play into the story a bit later on. So he does have that kind of quirk to him. Asuna is she is kind of the opposite of Kirito in that she's not very experienced with MMOs, and she kind of tried Sword Art Online, just on a whim out of nowhere. And she gets trapped in the game with all these people who know more about MMOs than her. She's a smart person and tends to handle things pretty well, but she's kind of trapped in this world where she doesn't understand it. It really frustrates her. Her and Kirito are both kind of loners to begin with. He kind of encounters her in a dungeon and helps her out, and gradually we see these two characters kind of become more accustomed to working as a team, which is a fairly common trope in books like these, but I think it works really well in this. It's kind of a slow burn. As for the actual bulk of the story, this book, as you can see, it's actually quite thick. And that's because it's basically 2 volumes. It says volume 1 here, but it's actually, if you consider each floor a different volume, there's 2 floors in this one, and so halfway through the book, they beat the first floor. Here is A Sister's All You Need, volume 2, which I'm actually only part way through this. I need to finish it. And here is Sword Art Online, and if you can see this, compare the two with, it's about 3 times as big. Basically 2 books in one. So I think it's a pretty good value. Because it goes floor by floor, it gives a lot of time to slowly introduce some of the features of Sword Art Online that aren't previously mentioned. As the people get higher in level and discover more things, there are more and more features added to the game world, which I think is a pretty cool storytelling kind of technique. Another thing I really liked about the book is that the boss fights, and there's 2 of them, because this is the first 2 floors of Sword Art Online. They have a real intensity to them. The kind of danger that they present to the characters, it really made me want to get to them and figure out what happens. Because even though that these 2 characters probably aren't going to die in the fights, right from the beginning, it kind of establishes that the side characters are fair game. Kirito being a beta tester plays into the plot a lot, and he he knows, I guess, the first 10 or so floors of the game, just based off what he was able to play during the beta test. So he can plan for these boss fights, but things had changed since the beta test. He could tell the reader what happens in the boss fights, and then the boss fight, unpredictably can diverge from that. And so seeing how that plays out in the story is really entertaining. As for the actual writing of the book, I thought it was really good because it's brief. It doesn't dwell a lot on purple prose and trying to be overly descriptive about things. It says what it needs to say for you to have a picture in your mind of what's happening, and not a lot more than that. So it's very kind of fluid. There wasn't really any part of the story that I felt dragged on. It's that the pacing is just really quick and just really engaging. One of the criticisms I've heard is that the main character is overpowered, and maybe perhaps that's in the original series. I don't, like I said, I don't know what happens in the original series, but it didn't really feel that way in this. He was very competent at the game, and he knows a lot about MMOs. It never really crosses the line to him being OP, especially in the second boss fight. Like you would think he kind of pulls through, and he's the hero and he saves everybody, but while it's kind of the case, it plays out in a way that you wouldn't expect. One thing that I was kind of wondering through the entire story, all 5 senses are like immersed into this world. Sounds, and a few parts it mentions that there's background music playing, which I feel like would probably drive people mad eventually. I have to imagine though that you could just turn that down. And so there's also you can taste things. There's it mentions very, very in passing. It mentions the game's taste engine. So I really like that there's in this world, some video game programmers got together and they made a taste engine. So you could taste the various pastries and meats of the animals that you hunt. But I was wondering, so would there even be sex in Sword Art Online? They mentioned that, okay, your avatar takes on your appearance that you have in real life. You can customize it and stuff, but would it have? Did they model the genitals? Do you still have your genitals in Sword Art Online? I guess is what I'm saying. And if so, are they fully functional? You have to eat in Sword Art Online, or else you actually feel hungry, I guess. So the rear bodies are getting drip fed in a hospital somewhere, but they still feel hungry because it's like a psychological thing. So they have to eat in the game world, or else they actually feel hungry. They don't ever mention having to having to take a dump or peeing. So I guess you don't do that in Sword Art Online. It never mentions anyone kind of whipping out the schlong and draining it into a bush or something. But could you theoretically have sexual intercourse in Sword Art Online, I guess is what I'm getting at. And if so, would you nut? Because the virtual reality gear, the headset, it can make you, it causes sensation, so you can feel pain, I guess, and all different sorts of things. So theoretically, if you did have sex in Sword Art Online, you could feel it, but in real life, there would be no friction. You would have to somehow be able to do it hands-free, frictionless. And there's the whole aspect of it in the real life. So they're laying in their hospital beds with the VR gear on their heads. They're being drip fed and presumably sponge bathed by the nurses there. You would ejaculate in real life. So if that would happen, a nurse would come into the hospital room, and they would see the person there with the VR gear on, and there would be a wet stain on the pants and stuff, and the nurse would be oh no, not again, but that's part of living. What I'm saying is they would be sexually frustrated in Sword Art Online if this was actually happening. This dude right here would be so sexually frustrated. So what I'm saying is the poor nurses that have to take care of these people in this game. You know, that's what I'm saying. Hopefully that gets answered in the second volume. Oh, sweet nectar. So right at the end, they're entering the 3rd floor of Aincrad or whatever it's called, the big old tower. And Kirito says, in a way, the 3rd floor is where SAO really starts. Asuna says, it is. Why is that? And he says, I started off with my now familiar unhelpful refrain. Well... And that's where it ends. They end on that note. Kudos to both pissing me off and hooking me for the next volume, because I really want to know what the answer to that is. Sword Art Online Progressive 001. It's really good. I enjoyed it. There were parts that I thought could have been expanded on, could have been focused on some more, but all in all, it was a really good read. I just really liked it. It's entertaining. Like I said, I don't know anything else about the franchise. Never watched the anime, never played any of the video games or whatnot. I mean, before reading this, like my only experience with Sword Art Online was basically dismembering a Kirito Pop vinyl figure. And that wasn't due to any, particular hatred for the character, but more so out of my disdain for pop vinyl figures. My friend had brought one to a gift exchange. When he had given it to me, he said I could do whatever I wanted with it, so I destroyed it. And just so you know, the head on those things, if you pull on it hard enough, it does come out, or it comes off, and it makes like a satisfying like little quirk noise, like, and maybe that's why they call them pop vinyls, because like the little pop sound it makes. But yeah, so that was fun. But other than that, I have no prior experience with this franchise. As for this book, it's really good. Oh, I should mention the art too. So there's these illustrations in the book. Don't copyright strike me. Don't copyright strike me, guys. Please, pretty please. Yen Press or whoever. So there's these big full page illustrations here, as you can see, and they're actually really well done. It's pretty legit, professional looking, and I mean, they don't add a whole bunch to the story, but I kind of wish there was more of them, because I just like seeing them. They're like a nice little treat. And that's it. That's all I got for you. Did you like this video? Did you love it? Hit the like, hit the subscribe, hit the bell so you can see my pretty face and have YouTube let you know when I upload a video like half a year from now. So goodbye, and I love you.